Welcome back to Washington. And yesterday evening, in a live address to the nation, President Donald Trump confirmed precision strikes had been ordered on targets associated with the Syrian government's chemical weapons program. But the action has been described by some as more limited in scope than many had expected, and the Pentagon described it as a one-off strike. So how successful should we regard it, and how effective will it be in achieving its stated aim of deterring the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime? Well, Donald Trump is quite clear on what he thinks. He's just sent out a tweet, and he says it's a perfectly executed strike last night. Thank you to France and the United Kingdom, he says, for their wisdom and the power of their fine military. He says, could not have had a better result. Mission accomplished. Well, joining me now from Seattle is Matthew Griffin, a former Ranger platoon commander, and in Washington, Don Bramer, a former U.S. Intelligence officer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, gentlemen. Matthew Griffin first. Do you agree with Donald Trump? Is this mission accomplished?
I think it's going to be very difficult to determine whether or not the mission was accomplished or not. There was a long period of time between when we gave notification of strikes and when the strikes actually happened. Those munitions could have been moved very easily between sites. So it's still going to take a little bit of investigation to really find out if we were effective.
But Matthew, do you think it went far enough? Do you think it sent a powerful enough message to the Syrian regime?
Yeah, I think we actually went too far. I don't think we had the legal justification for the strike. I think it should have been a UN issue or a regional issue between Israel, Jordan, and Saudi. I think we should have held off on the strike, but I'm glad that we kept it limited in nature to the way it went last night.
You think we should have held off on a strike, or you think the West should have held off on a strike? What is the alternative then when confronted with images that we saw on our television screens of children gasping for breath and all these people dying?
It's a tough one to have, but I think what we need to be seeking for is images of proof. There have been allegations of urine tests that have proved positive for chlorine and a nerve agent, but there has not been any verification of the proof to the international community. As Western nations, we really need to be seeking proof and justification for these wars, specifically with legal approval before we go and wage them. Until then, I think it's in everybody's best interest to take a tactical pause and wait until we have proof.
Don Bramer, you are a former intelligence officer. Intelligence absolutely key here. The evidence absolutely key, as Matthew was just saying. Do you think they did get the evidence that justified the attacks?
Well, I would certainly hope so. As you said, it's been an entire week since the attacks happened, and in that case, we hope that they were accumulating the right amount of evidence to make sure that the locations of the attacks were correct, and also that we had justification, as Matthew said.
And do you think it went far enough, Don? Do you think it sent out the message that Donald Trump intended?
Well, I think the strikes were precise and limited, and I think they were exactly where we wanted them to go. However, I think we need to have an overall picture of what do we actually want to do with a Mideast policy, and how are we going to align ourselves with our allies and the United Nations so that we can move forward and finally put some of these issues to bed there.
And Don, I'm interested to know, are you surprised by the limited nature of this, that they just concentrated on chemical weapons facilities? Do you think they should have tried to attack and degrade Syrian military infrastructure to a greater extent?
Well, in all reality, you've given them a week's warning that something was coming. So whatever targets you may have been looking at the day after the attack, in all likelihood, they've been moved or relocated by then. So that's hard to say. I'm hoping that we were successful in the raids against the 3 sites there, or the attacks per se. But I think, in all likelihood, they could have been moved just as, the Russians have moved their ships. A lot of the aircraft's been moved. A lot can happen in a week.
And Matthew, you say that you didn't agree with the strikes. Where do you think Western policy should go now on Syria? Because do we just concede, does the West just concede that Russia and the Syrian regime have won this civil war?
No, I don't think so. I think there are plenty of regional players there that have interests in making sure this goes peacefully. I mean, this attack happened, this alleged chemical attack happened less than 100 miles from the Jordanian border, Israeli border, Lebanese border. We sell billions of dollars of foreign military equipment, to regional players to take care of regional security issues. And this is when we need them to step up and actually take care of those issues, take the lead, and manage the situation to keep more innocent people from getting hurt. That's what we need to see from the international community, not just led by the U.S.
And Matthew, do you think that Donald Trump saying a couple of weeks ago that he wanted out of Syria and he wanted out of Syria soon, do you think that complicated any strategy by the Americans or the Western allies on Syria?
Yeah, I think that every time we threaten to pull out, something weird happens, it sucks us back in. And I think just critically as citizens and as lawmakers, we need to start taking a look at this, very, very deeply to make sure that we're not continually getting sucked into another protracted war in the Middle East.
Don, let me ask you this as a former intelligence officer. One of the pivotal points in all this was when James Mattis from the Pentagon seemed to give Donald Trump a pause for thought on this whole issue of evidence. This is an area in Duma, controlled by Syrian forces, the Russian forces there. Just give us a sense of how difficult it is for the West to get real evidence of what has happened in Duma and how difficult it is to verify it from an intelligence point of view.
Well, there are many different types of intelligence. However, we are not allowed to have forces on the ground and inspectors to actually verify this and prove. I think if Assad was true in nature and his statements that this was not an attack caused by his doing, then he would allow forces from the outside to come in and gather the evidence. What the biggest part is the fact that he builds those walls and will not let anyone come in and do inspections says that there's something he's hiding. So I think probably that was the best thing to do. I don't think that the attacks probably were as fully successful as they wanted. However, they did not limit or there were no civilian casualties. So in that part, I think it's good.
And what do you think, Matthew, will happen now? Presumably, we've got this slight contradiction between Donald Trump, who says this will be a sustained operation, and Mattis, the defense secretary, who says it's a one-off strike. What do you think should happen now? Because it's quite possible that the Syrian regime and the Russians will just sit this out and wait for a few months and then potentially, if they want to, use chemical weapons again.
That is likely the most probable course of action. We've seen this cycle repeated time and time again. We're going to launch a limited strike. Everybody's going to see it in the news. Everybody's going to feel happy and satisfied. We're going to go about our way. Then it'll happen again. It's more than likely that we're going to be here in 6 months without deliberate, direct action by the UN and international communities on this.
Don, what do you think of that? Where do we go from here?
Well, I have to absolutely agree with Matthew here. I think at some point our allies in the region that we have provided all this equipment need to step up and take a more active role. The U.S. cannot bear the blunt and be the tip of everything. Our allies in that region, that's their home, and they need to step up.
All right, Matthew Griffin and Don Bramer, thank you very much for joining us on Sky News. And just to